Going into Game 9 of the World Chess Championship, Magnus Carlsen led by 2 points over the challenger Jan Nepomniachtchi. Now the players had a rest day to recuperate after the drama of the last few games. And in fact, Nepo had made some changes during that rest day. He came to the board sporting a new haircut. Gone was the top knot, and instead he had a flat top with a short back and sides. Looked quite sort of 50s rock and roll actually. So the question was, could he rock and roll at the board? Nepo with the white pieces. Well, new haircut, new opening move. Gone was 1e4 and he went for 1c4 instead. Carlsen started pretty solidly. It looks like it could go into a kind of Catalan here, as they've had with colours reversed. But here, Carlsen played a very interesting move, and a move I really would not have anticipated. You know, if you want to play solidly all the normal moves, you can just play knight f6, for example. Instead, Carlsen played, in some senses, quite a risky move, going into basically a sort of reverse Benoni position. It's quite an ambitious move. Instead of developing, you're advancing the pawn, trying to get some space. Knight f3, knight c6, castles from white, bishop c5, d3. So this is a slightly unusual setup from Carlsen. This, of course, is very standard from Nepo. This nice kingside fianchetto, nice solid kingside position. And there's potential to use this diagonal with the bishop. But this is a little bit unusual. However, if you put this into an engine, then it shows that actually these are the top moves. The engine approves of these moves. Knight d2. But Carlsen was still taking up quite a lot of time here. It's really interesting. Nepo was moving quite quickly. And you have to ask yourself, well, you know, if this was preparation, well, why was he taking up so much time? I mean, it clearly was preparation, because this is a slightly unusual continuation from black, and you know, you wouldn't expect this kind of improvisation in a World Championship match. All top line moves, basically. So there is pressure here, and Nepo plays e3, breaking down this pawn in the middle. Black can maintain that space, but actually this is a pretty pleasant reverse Benoni, where, you know, this knight is going to come here and open up the long diagonal. There could potentially be pressure on this pawn as well. But Carlsen took on e3. Bishop takes e3, so white is pretty well developed. So Carlsen has given up this centre, so it looks a bit strange. And he was still taking his time here. Knight g4 played. Well, again, this must have been preparation. And in fact, Carlsen admitted as much after the game. But he also said he'd sort of forgotten how the line should go. He knew that this was a correct move. Of course, if the knight takes that nice dark square bishop, then black can be very happy. So that bishop moves to c5. Yeah, Carlsen said he knew this was the line, but he simply couldn't remember how it went afterwards. Castle's kingside, all very sensible. Both sides castle, tuck their king away nice and safely behind those pawns. So the struggle is taking place in the middle and on the queen side. d4, Nepo grabs some space in the middle, but this a pawn is actually very useful. Just pushing that knight out of the way. Bishop takes, so basically white is forced to exchange on e7. Bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, and then knight c5. So that knight was protecting that pawn in the middle, but moves up here. Now it attacks that pawn on a4, but actually to some extent that knight is a little bit vulnerable. Carlsen pushed that pawn on again. And here is already quite an important moment in the game. Nepo thought for about 5 minutes here and took that pawn, which is kind of a practical decision. But the move that a lot of people were suggesting was b4. I mean, it looks quite nice if you can push that knight out of the way. Carlsen said afterwards that he would have taken on b4. Now here's the point, rook b1, and when the knight moves back, white can take that pawn there. But Carlsen wants to play this move, so it's basically an exchange of pieces. Now the rook has to move off that long diagonal, so it gets in the clear. So basically it's level material. I mean, it is a slightly unclear position, but you know, black has trumps here. This is a nice centre. The rook is very interestingly placed on the 5th rank, but this pawn could be useful later on, and there is potential to attack that pawn on d4. Carlsen said he wasn't overly worried, but that is the engine top line, the engine recommendation. But Nepo took on a3, which is just a very practical move, really. Rook d8. So there is pressure here. So the knight dropped back to b3. The knight has to drop back because black is threatening to take on d4. And then take that knight. So for example, if rook e1, then knight takes d4 and queen c5. You see that knight is loose there. So the knight dropped back just to guard that pawn. So that's solidly protected now. But still, with that rook here opposite the queen, here, that can be a little bit problematic for white. Knight f6, that's a super solid move. That knight was really out on a limb here on this square g4, so it moves back to f6, and that stops any d5 push. Rook e1, so that's now opposite the queen. Rook's on semi-open file, so the queen shifted out of the way and at the same time took that pawn. So now material is level again. But optically, it certainly looks pleasant for white because of these pawns. Nevertheless, because black has this semi-open file, then black can use these squares and that file. So all in all, maybe white is just a little bit better here, but should be okay for black. h4, slightly mysterious move, h4. It can, of course, be useful later on to gain space, but at the moment it doesn't achieve too much. Bishop d7. So, as is so often the case in these positions where there's a bishop on g2, that bishop is the problematic piece for black. If that bishop can successfully get in the game, then black shouldn't have any problems. But basically what the bishop is doing is just coming out. So now the rooks are connected. That's important. The rooks like to combine together. They're just stronger like that. And the bishop might well just move out of the way. Or if black can arrange moving that knight and play to c6, that's what that bishop would like to do, to challenge that bishop here. Knight e5. So Nepo trying to grab the initiative here, moving this knight out and opening up the bishop's diagonal, so that bishop drops back to e8. And if pieces are exchanged on c6, then black is absolutely fine here. I mean, I think you can see that those exchanges just sort of clears black's back line there. And yes, white still has a centre, but black has pretty nice pieces there. Certainly black's king is in no danger at all. So coming back to this position, bishop e8 just played. Queen e3, careful move, just protecting that pawn. Two attackers and now two defenders, so the pawn is now safe. Queen b4, yeah, looks like a nice move from Carlsen. Queen is on a nice square, and perhaps preparing to put that rook on a3, and maybe double rooks on the a file. So you can see that pawn advance has given black some counterplay. and that balances white's pawn centre. Rook b1. So now black has to be a little bit careful because there could be discovered attacks if that knight moves. So Carlsen exchanged on e5. And here, if he drops back with the knight to d7, actually black is absolutely fine. Instead he played knight g4, played it quite quickly. Which certainly doesn't look bad, but actually Carlsen had overlooked Nepo's next move. Queen e1. That came as a little bit of an unpleasant surprise. So the problem is that this knight is out on a limb again. If Carlsen avoids a queen exchange, let's say queen takes c4, then f3 just wins the knight. You can see that knight is trapped, nowhere to go. Pawn, of course, is covered by the queen. So after queen e1, Carlsen was forced to exchange queens. Pawn to f3, winning the knight is still a threat, so Carlsen had to make room for that knight. Pawn to h5. So that gives the knight a retreat on h6, and that allowed Nepo to take a pawn. So Nepo a pawn up. Carlsen played the rook to a4. What was interesting was that Carlsen sort of seemed to bounce back. You know, he played those next moves like h5 and rook a4 fairly quickly. Was he covering up the fact that he'd overlooked queen e1? Maybe Nepo sensed he had. In any case, Carlsen is kind of lucky that there's no disaster. He is a pawn down, but actually that rook is so well placed looking at these two weak pawns. And black's pieces are quite good here. And the best that white has is to push that knight back. Let's put the bishop back. And black actually has decent compensation here. Knight threatens the pawn. King f2. Well, the knight can be put back here. Basically, it is very difficult for white to free himself here, because these pawns are sort of chronically weak, actually. But that didn't happen. Nepo must have sensed that Carlsen had overlooked queen e1, because after queen e1, Carlsen thought for about 4.5 minutes. And in this position, Nepo did not sense any danger at all, and he played his pawn to c5. He thought he was better with his extra pawn. But there is a massive problem with that move. Carlsen looked very puzzled, and after about 3 minutes, played the pawn to c6, and the trap is shut. That bishop has nowhere to go. So all Carlsen needs to do is just attack the bishop, and it's gone. There is no way back. Of course, that pawn is solidly protected by the bishop here. So pawn to f3 played by Nepo after, well, almost a 20-minute thought, 20-minute think. He was obviously just trying to gather himself. He could have resigned straight away, but instead played f3, driving the knight back. The knight is safe. And he tried rook e4. And obviously that shouldn't be exchanged off. Instead, Carlsen just retreated the rook, attacking the bishop. And after rook b4, protecting the bishop, rook b8 attacks the bishop again, and you can see there is no way out. All those squares here are covered, so that bishop is lost. There's just one little tactic. If bishop takes pawn, well, you don't take that because of rook takes. But instead, rook takes rook, and then there you go. If pawn takes, then rook takes rook. The pawn is pinned. Pin and win. And black is just a rook up. So back to the game. Rook b8 just played. Nepo played a4, just allowing that bishop to be taken. He found a cute little idea, actually, to give himself just a glimmer of hope. So he gave up a pawn, so he's now a whole bishop down, but you can see that knight now has this beautiful c5 square. If you got rid of that knight on h6, then white would be positionally winning here. I mean, what a beautiful piece that knight on c5 is. But the knight rides in to save the day. That knight is going to hop over to the queen side, there via these squares. Whoops, via e3 or d4 and then into d5. Nepo pushed the pawn and pushed again. Carlsen still has to be precise to win this. And he could have played the knight to d4 to b5. But instead, well, Magnus is a maximalist. He took on g3. And he'd calculated that that knight can come back just in time. After a7, rook a8, in fact, that knight is going to come back like this and take that pawn. And white does not have time to rearrange his pieces. Black is just winning there. So in this position, Nepo tried, instead of a7, he tried knight a4. So that's still tricky. So if a7, the rook moves and then knight b6. But c5, excellent move. a7. And now not rook a8, knight b6. But instead rook d8. Excellent move. If knight b6, then bishop c6. And, well, white can make a queen. But who cares? Another pawn is dropping on the king side, and that is game over. So basically, it really is utterly lost. Knight takes c5, and now another accurate move from Carlsen, rook a8, and that means that knight really has nowhere to go. If knight here, then of course rook takes pawn, and in the meantime, well, this knight is just going to hop back to one of these squares, c8 or c6, and that pawn will be taken. So here, Jan Nepomniachtchi resigned the game. Wow, that is tough to take. He has suffered an absolute collapse in this match. I feel really sorry for him, on the highest stage to basically, blunder in these last couple of games and throw them away, really, with a couple of, gross errors is really hard to see. That incredible game 6 that Carlsen won obviously has taken its toll on Nepo. So let's just have confirmation of the scores. Whoops, that's not them. Hang on. Let's come back here. There we go. Sorry about that. It is 6-3 to Carlsen. And there are only 5 games remaining. And, well, it would be a miracle for Nepo to come back from that. But we still have 5 games to go. Match schedule. There is another game tomorrow. Game 10 will be played tomorrow. And then there's going to be a rest day. So do check out the commentary on Chess24. There's the Oslo studio, which is really entertaining. And there's Judith Polgar, supported by Anish Giri, for a deep dive into the position. Wow. Do join me tomorrow. Let's see if Nepo can find some form. Thanks for watching.